So I was scrolling through Instagram the other day and I came across this t-shirt that said Jesus in Therapy, and I wanted to grab it instantly because I think that the world is recognizing, the church is recognizing that both are necessary, that the need for therapy doesn't negate the need for Jesus and vice versa. And so I gathered two pretty great people to talk about the mind, which is a terrible thing to waste. Y'all remember that? We're talking to Pastor Adriane Grant and we're talking to Marissa Felder about our mind. There's a battle for it. Let's talk.
Hi.
So here we are, right?
Here we are, guys.
Here we are.
I thank y'all for joining us. This is a conversation that I feel like is long overdue. I wanted to have it season 1. Didn't get a chance to do that. Didn't work out, but here we are, season 2.
Yes.
And we're determined to have this conversation because I think the more that I see happening in our world, in our society, but even in the church, I think we need to have more conversations and action surrounding mental health and the church. And I think that you guys both have amazing perspectives on it. Marissa, you are a licensed counselor and you do this for a living. You have your own practice. And Adriane, you've been doing this for some time with your work. You've been doing some programming for youth and all of the things so that they can get their minds together and avoid some problems, right? Some, like, that's interesting. Like over here, I feel like we're dealing with problems that already happened and you're dealing with intervention. Prevention and intervention, that's what it is, right? And so thank y'all for doing this. I really want to just dig into this. I want to throw out a question.
Of course.
I want to start this way. As believers, we have the Word of God, we have the Holy Spirit. He is our counselor.
Yes.
Do we need, as believers, anyone outside of that in order to help us navigate through challenges in life? And why, if you believe yes, we do?
Boy, they. So I think I automatically think about, and we were actually recently talking about this, how when a lot of times when I'm reading books that were written by the Apostle Paul, I'll like put his voice in there, but it's a reminder for me of how much I wouldn't be able to accomplish, or I wouldn't have the clarity, the boldness in certain moments that I needed to make some really hard decisions if I didn't have him playing a part in that. And I wonder for the early church, the same thing, if Timothy didn't have the Apostle Paul. Like we talk about so many of those other things where he was pouring into him as a spiritual leader, but he had to pay attention to the wholeness of Timothy in order for him to like really make an impact. And for people, for the church to actually see that publicly, to see that progression, to see what that pour actually looked like and the fruit that that came out of it, I think it's really important for, yes, counsel to happen privately, but for people to even start having these conversations that they're having about it is so important, so that people can see the benefits of those one-on-one conversations and how it collectively impacts the body, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think in your question, you talk about do we need? And I think we need as the need arises. I think that that's very important. I'm so glad that the church has now opened up
Say something.
their kind of mindset to allow people or for people to pursue counseling and not be villainized or accused. You don't have enough faith. Everything because
you don't got the Holy Ghost.
Back in the days, everything was handled on the prayer line, basically. Just to, lay hands and then you're supposed to be all done. And as we see, that didn't work out.
Didn't work out so good.
Right. So as the need arises, we definitely. I think the church is finding their way to therapists and hopefully Christian therapists. Because there is a big difference.
I think that therapy is intimidating, and I don't want to dance around that because I think that too many people kind of act like it's not that big of a deal. I think therapy is a big deal. I think that we are really afraid of the truth not just of the external, what other people have done, that I think we're afraid to really discover what's actually happening on the inside of us. I think therapy confronts, and I think that the goal is to change. And if we're honest, we don't always want to change. And so I think that the idea of going to therapy and processing through maybe years of trauma or undealt with hurts, I think that process is daunting. And so I get it. I get why we'd be intimidated by it. But I don't think that because we're intimidated by it, I don't think that that means that we shouldn't do it. I think we do it despite how we feel about it, because we know that the end result of that is healing.
I think when Adriane, when you were talking, I think one of the things that stuck out for me is, do we think that the counsel that we receive from one another, is that the same thing as us really dealing with our own mental health issues, right? So when you talked about Paul and Timothy, I think there are some people that would argue that that wasn't counsel. Like, Paul wasn't a psychologist, he wasn't a therapist. Is that enough? Is that good enough? Is that enough? Does he know, is he skilled at this? Or do you need somebody who has gone to school for this? What say ye?
I say a lot. I think that's circumstantial too, because there's different needs that arise, and there's different people as well, and there's different relationships. I think that clearly the relationship that Paul and Timothy had was nuanced, right? And so because of my connection, the intimacy, the understanding of who you are and where you're going, I'm able to pour into you in a way that someone who maybe didn't know you wouldn't be able to. But on the flip side, because they don't know you, they can have a different angle, they can have different insight, and they are able to speak to things. But Paul had an expertise that Timothy needed. And I'm sure that there's, a therapist and a psychologist out there where, Timothy was like, oh, I don't know what to do about this Gentile side of me, that there would still be, something there where there could be someone in modern day text that would be able to speak to that. But I think it's a damaging conversation. I think what I've been seeing a lot, mainly in the context of social media, is that people are saying both is needed, but then when one is mentioned, then it's automatically, well, what about this? And it's just like if we're saying that both can coexist, then let's really have this conversation about how Jesus can show up in the church. He can show up with using, your pastor, but he can also show up and easily use a therapist, and he can also show up and use the stranger if he wanted to too. If he could use a donkey, then why put any limits on the different angles and the many approaches that he knows you need in order to get from point A to point B? And I even think about so much of the cognitive behavioral therapies, like the relationship between the way you think and the decisions that you make, and how many scriptures are about yes, your heart, but also what you do in deed. And there's so many different relationships that help cultivate that. And if you limit it to one lane and one angle and one dynamic, then you're only seeing God in one lane and one dynamic.
Yeah, I would say, I love hearing that. I would say that all relationships are important. Any and the ability to communicate with people can be beneficial sometimes. Sometimes it can be
more damaging.
Yeah. But in the therapy relationship, one thing that maybe everybody may not know or understand is that we're really not friends.
Right.
We're not friends, and that helps because then I'm able to challenge my clients in a way that maybe a friend may not be able to. And the thing is, my clients signed up for this. So whereas they may take offense if one of their friends said, well, you tend to always do this, or you're making decisions like this, and do you feel like that, that's the kind of question I would ask. Do you feel like that's been helpful to you? A friend may say, yeah, get off my case, or, whatever. But as the therapist, I can challenge and ask you to think about that. So, the communication, yes, you're gonna benefit from a family relationship, a friendship. We need our friends.
Yeah.
We need people in our lives, So yes, it's good, but it's not the same.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think you had hit on something earlier, really surrounding like the stigma that I think we've had as believers. The thought of going to a counselor for your problems when we have Jesus, and if that didn't really work, we at least had a prayer partner, or somebody who could kind of get us through. I think, this is my perspective, I think that it is dangerous for us to use what can be considered a quick fix as opposed to us dealing with our real heart issues. And certainly I'm not saying at all, hello, I believe in the prayer line. I think that the Lord can use a moment, right, to get us to a position. But I think sometimes those moments are used to propel us to a more long-term like solution. It's the catalyst to get us to something else. And I think that sometimes we're using it as the thing as opposed to, okay, this gave me enough strength to get to somebody to talk this out and to really deal with the stuff that's in my heart. What do you all think is happening in terms of the stigma that's associated with mental health and people who are Christians and maybe not having enough faith, as you said? Like, what are your thoughts surrounding that?
Well, I think that I think that if they're if people like the prayer line, I definitely feel like is needed and good. But in some of our churches are not healthy, and so even after you've been on the prayer line, you're kind of, if you didn't get right, if it didn't work, then it's on you. You lacked the faith. You didn't do, and really, you really just may need more tools. But the uneducated or the person, the clergy may not really understand that. And now you become a problem or looked or viewed a certain way, which you're not really going to grow through that or feel like I'm loved and accepted, or now I need help and I can't really get the help, and all sorts of stuff. You get shamed and judged. It's just like, cut you down, right?
Not worse.
Because someone that doesn't really understand the benefit of therapy and how useful it can be, and not that it's going to remove God from your life. It's actually going to help enhance God in your life. Really. But sometimes we have so many church people who are afraid that you didn't take it to God. Well, maybe God was the person, the one that got you there. And made this way so that you could get the tools and the understanding to why you're doing or why you're falling into the same thing, or similar things.
To that point, I think there are people who are afraid, I'm going to say rightfully so, because I think there are some new age practices that are out there, right? That's even in therapy, that's a little questionable for us as believers. And I wonder how we help people to sift through what is okay for Christians and what is not. I don't know if you all have something to. I know you mentioned like make sure that they're Christian therapists, and I think that was actually a point that I don't want to quickly overlook because I think it's super important that.
And unfortunately, we have so many people that market themselves as Christian therapists, and they're really not. And they're using things, but I have said, when you don't see certain things kind of encouraged from the Word, but then I have to say some people really don't read their Word.
Well,
so
there's that.
They don't know.
It might be in there somewhere.
I didn't see that, but But I will say, for the ones that have gone to some of the therapists that things got a little weird, they knew it was weird. And if they just stopped and said, you know what, I'm not going to do this. And some of the ones that have come to me, they said, things got a little weird when they started asking me to do this and burn that. And all that, like, stuff got a little weird. And I said, good. And you know, so, yeah, there are people that just say, I'm a Christian.
Yeah.
No, and you're not.
Yeah.
And, you know.
All Christians aren't created
That's
equal.
right, they're not.
I think we underestimate the possibility, the opportunity for a partnership between the church and mental health services, because I think it would resolve a lot of this, especially for people who don't know the things, and it's just like, well, you said it, and I don't know, and I don't read, so let's just do this. Like, I think there has to be more conversations around that, because what I'm really hearing is a lack of education and awareness is what causes people to be confused about, is this okay, and who's the right person to go to. So there's education on the end of the church, but also mental health services kind of amplifying, like clarifying what a therapist actually does, and what you can receive from a psychologist versus like if you were to talk to someone directly in your church. Like, those services are different. Now, when it gets spooky, that's where the church will be like, it's a spook, you know? Let's not do this. Okay. But I also, because I hear like people, because they're afraid to come into contact with those people, they don't try a therapist at all, right? And I was recently explaining to someone that a therapist is similar to like if you were going to the doctor. If you did not like your doctor, you look for another one, you know? So I think people can get discouraged if they just
you don't like your church.
You can get another one.
Get another one.
That's true.
And I wanted to interject with that because I feel like that's kind of the pattern that we see is when somebody doesn't like something, they're like now just throwing the whole thing away instead of saying, wait, this didn't work. But there is another place or there is another person that actually could work.
Now, if you keep becoming, like, if your pattern is
you never
consistently like, I'm a nomad,
then
of course it comes to a matter of what role are you playing in all of this. But I do think if you are actually taking the time, if this is something that you didn't initially want to do in the first place, and a lot of people initially don't want to go to a therapist, they don't want to talk about their problems, and if they are spending money on a therapist, they're just happy that somebody's listening to them talk about their sandwich this morning. You know what I mean? Like, there's some people who don't know fully what they're walking into, but the fact that you are taking that step says something. And you never know. There have been times where the therapist that you're working with can actually, you know, have that conversation with you, like, oh, this isn't working, but I can actually refer you to somebody else that may be a better fit based off of the feedback that you've given. So I think therapy actually gives people the space for people to speak up about things they don't normally speak about. And it's supposed to be in the context of something that's safe. So you have to take the risk and kind of explore and continue to have those conversations. I think there is also, like you were mentioning, like there's not that many Christian therapists that are like, are you actually Christian or are you Christian and everything else?
The Christian affirming, some of them are just, they're not really, they don't know.
It's like, it does bring up for me then how many of the mental health professionals are actually secure in their position where they feel like they can fully bring Jesus, or if there's some hesitation because of the pushback that people are already having, or because of the lack of understanding, that they feel like this pressure to compromise, especially even just to get clients, because the other people who are coming are ready to throw that sage around. You know what I mean? So
not throw it around.
Don't do that, guys. So yeah, I think there has to be
Put it out there, making sure you know.
Don't do that.
I think people have to be willing to take the risk, but also that there maybe needs to be more support for those mental health professionals to have the boldness and know what the tools look like. What does it look like for me to bring Jesus and not have all of this other backlash, or maybe the backlash does come, but how do I navigate that, you know? A lot of people want someone that looks like them too, and that can get very tricky if I want someone who's Christian, and then I want someone who's black, and I want them to be a man, and I don't want them to be too old because that reminds me of somebody else. So then it's like, so now you're looking for this like 30-year-old black Christian man that can do virtual and in person potentially, and those nuances really matter to people.
Yeah.
But then it makes the pool very small,
Yeah.
and that can be very discouraging for people too. And so navigating that within the church of, should I care about the identity of my therapist in order to get the resources that I need or reach the goal that I want to reach, can be a challenging conversation as well.
Yes.
It's happening.
Because I have a lot of thoughts going on in my mind, but I'm thinking about, I think some of those people would also have been challenged by what Jesus looked like. And I wonder if he was here in person, in the flesh, would we be open to his counsel? I think with that said, I think if we can recognize that Jesus didn't necessarily fit everybody's build, right? The person that you
Messiah
thought should have
or-
showed up. I think in the same token, I think the people who are assigned to help us, we have to be open to the fact that they may not look like us, they may not be our gender, they may not be our race, but they've been assigned to us, right? And I think that as we're led in every other way in our lives, so we say, I think we are led to counselors, to therapists, and we ask the Holy Spirit for his guidance and trust him, right? And not just trust what we desire. Because I think sometimes you can get the person that look like you, sound like you, does the same things as you, and that's the exact person that you don't need. Right? Like, that's exactly what I don't need. I need somebody who's actually not like me. And so I pray that people are open to like who the Lord allows to come into his space. Yeah.
Do you believe that people should vet their therapists with their leaders, their spiritual leaders?
Should for me is the word that gives me a no. Like, I don't think you like. I don't know if it's a should. Like, you should do it. I think there could be some wisdom in it, right? Because hopefully you believe similarly to your leadership, and so they might be able to help you see some of the stuff that's not really what they say that it is. But I think if you make that a hard rule, I think that's
awkward.
Yeah, that's all. Yeah.
I think that's a no for me also.
Yeah.
To vet them through your spiritual leader, they may not have the knowledge, experience, all that to be able to really fully help in that way. But I do believe that you should feel comfortable along your journey to communicate with your spiritual leader that certain things may be happening or being said in your therapy session or and all. I think that if you are open to sharing that, then maybe the spiritual leader could hear from the Lord and say, you know what, you might need to pray on that, or let's do some research before you start, doing things like that.
The other reason why I think that's important, meaning being open to that, having that conversation, is because your therapist and your spiritual leader, they're in partnership, right? From two different angles, right? To help you in your walk. And so it's kind of like if I don't know at all that you're going to a counselor, it's kind of like I'm missing a component to this that I should know so that I can like pray effectively, counsel effectively, walk with you effectively. So I think that information is good to know, but the vetting is like, that's on you. Yeah.
I think one of the things that I set out to do when I became, not just when I became a pastor, but when I became a leader, I chose to lead the way I wanted to be led. I chose to bring people into the process and not just present somebody who had already been fully processed. And so when we come to meetings and all of the things, I process in front of people. I don't try to come with a full thought out plan and just dictate to people what should be done. We come together, we reason together, we dialogue together, and I show them my wounds. I think that one of the greatest things that Jesus did after he had been resurrected is when he showed the disciples his wounds. I think we often focus on Thomas, but it wasn't just Thomas. He showed all of the disciples his wounds. And he could have healed himself. He could have closed the holes up. He could have presented himself as a glorified body, but he did not. He showed them his pain. He showed them the areas that were broken. And I think as leaders, that's the same job that we're supposed to do, because it helps people to process through their stuff. I can't process through with someone who's never been broken. I can't process through with someone who's never revealed their wounds to me. And so I try to do that with our leaders so that they can do it with people that they lead as well.
I got a question for y'all. All right, so yeah, here we go. So we believe as Christians, I'm gonna throw this out here as a blanket statement because it's what it should be. We believe in deliverance. We believe that there are some things that are just not of this world, right? There are other spirits that are at work, and that deliverance is available for people. How do we know what is a need for deliverance and what is a need for counsel? How do we help people through that?
So,
on that note,
I'll keep mine short. But I am an advocate where both are always necessary. And I would say that cycles are typically a sign in the conversation, are typically a sign for me that you more than likely actually need deliverance and we need to push pause on this whole counseling situation. So if I'm constantly I'm asking you a question, you can't answer it at all, like there's like complete shutdown or something along those lines, and or it's a very repetitive nature where it almost seems like there's constant wall. Basically, if there's any form of actual manifestation that's happening during a counseling session, then it's then I'm like, let's put a pin in this. So I think, but either way, I'm like, I typically at this point tell people like we can meet, but I actually really think that you should go through deliverance as well. It just makes it opens it up so much more. And
they work together.
Yes, they work together rather than just like walking you through this. And really it helps, I think, remind them how much Jesus is still at the center of this conversation and at the center of the work. And it's not me. Yeah. It's not you. Like he gives us the grace to do these things. And if that continues to be a challenge for you, just you're trying, but you feel like you just keep hitting a wall and keep hitting a wall, and you're going through this counseling. To me, that's definitely like red flag. Just get the bucket.
Yeah, and I would say it is the skill of a Christian counselor to know the difference and to be able to, because they agreed, that they wanted, you want me to be able to operate in this way, and so then therefore the challenge happens when it's kind of like, no, what I'm seeing, if you're in, sometimes depending on the client, you have to kind of like say, I just want to say something that you might take offense to a little bit, but this sounds like more that you need deliverance. This is bigger than just say the anxiety or like that. So usually, they're pretty. I don't think I've come across any Christian clients that have not understood that.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm actually shocked by that.
No, yeah.
And the reason why I'm so shocked is because I think there are such different perspectives about deliverance, period. I know many Christian sects who are like, deliverance, like what? Like, it's a no altogether. And so that's why I'm surprised, because there are so many people that are just like, that's not a real thing.
Yeah, no, I get a lot of people who they've either been through deliverance, or they know that they really do need deliverance, or once I make that suggestion, that they go through deliverance, they're pretty, you know.
I'm actually really glad to hear that.
Yeah, yeah.
No, that's actually encouraging because
Yeah.
I think that it means that people are more open than maybe I even anticipated.
Yeah.
Hallelujah to
Yeah.
that.
We can challenge some things, and that's why when you're, you know, and as the therapist, like I said, we're not friends.
Yeah.
So I'm not here to like pat you on the back, hey girl, and whatever. No.
I think that in an effort to make sure that our spirit man was strong, I think that we forgot about our mind. We forgot about our mental health. And so I think that what is now happening in our generation is that we're realizing that to work on your mind does not negate the truth about who Jesus is and how he is in control of your spirit man. And so we're bringing them all together because I think that Jesus was concerned about the whole man. He wasn't concerned about just one aspect of us, but he came to redeem every aspect of us. And so we recognize that although deliverance is a necessary thing, so is therapy. Here's the other thing. The Bible says that safety is in a multitude of counsel, right? And so we, I think, have relegated that to just decision making, but I don't think that's the fullness of what the Bible really was speaking about. I think it was speaking about our total man. It was speaking about our mental health. It was speaking about our financial health. There's a lot of things that if we would consult other people, we would be able to offload and to process through so that the whole man would be healed and whole, and we'd be able to do deliverance and breakthrough on other people as well.
Oh, let me ask you that. So, how do you deal with? I think it's probably more difficult for pastoral relationships, but because you see your clients when they signed up for a meeting. But for people who see the people that they counsel on a consistent basis, how do you draw the line between personal and professional, I guess, for lack of better terms, from your end as a counselor, but also how does that person navigate through speaking on a consistent basis with this person that you believe that you're building a relationship with, but it's a professional one and you are trying to not blur those lines?
So seeing a person more frequently than the counseling would probably likely be in church. And I think you and I had a conversation about the lay counselors and stuff. I don't see my clients outside of the session. If I do, if it's something like they happen to be in the same store, or maybe I try not to take clients that I'm that familiar with. That's something that we're warned not to have dual relationships with people. Because people, they don't understand when you're kind of like being yourself, and all of that. So, but other than that, you can establish at the beginning of this relationship that this is in my therapeutic interactions with you, and this is how I have to behave, and I'm not going to be. I really kind of steer clear from a lot of the personal stuff. At least that's my training. So I really don't have that much. I don't have that.
I wonder because I think in that context it's really easy to do, right? You sign up for an appointment, and I don't see you. I don't really know you outside of that. I think.
But in church you do.
For pastors who we have, that's a part of the responsibility is to counsel. But not just pastors, elders, ministers, right? Like there's a part of the responsibility is to counsel on some level, not maybe the same thing. But I think it's much easier for those lines to get blurred. And even if it's not, because I don't think it's usually from the pastor or the minister or the elder, it's usually from other people. Like it's easy for them to expect now. We've had conversations, you know my business, you know my history, you know my family, you know. So it's easy for them to have an expectation that outside of here, we're gonna have something that this isn't, you know, and I think that's difficult to navigate.
My question would be, what are the codes of conduct for the clergy?
Well, you wanna elaborate for me, like what do you...
Yeah, because you have an office, everyone, people walk in this office, but yet you're walking among the members and all. But where do you say, I'm not going to, let's say somebody's making a joke, and of course, a business and everything, like, whatever. But you have to know where you don't cross the line and invite them into that familiarity, because they don't understand how you know.
Invite them into the familiarity. That
This is
just
awkward.
blessed me, actually.
Right,
blessing,
and that's
but
where I
it's
would say that your calling as an elder, as a pastor, whatever, that's where you have to make sure that you're walking according to your code of conduct and ethics and all of that, because they don't understand.
What's so interesting about that, right? And I've been thinking about this a lot recently. I've been thinking about my bishop, right? The people who came before me, and thank you. The people who came before
That
me,
looks great.
and how they were revered. And I don't mean that in like a worshipful way, right? But there were certain things. I was talking to a friend, and we were talking about this. There were certain things, places I wasn't going to invite them to, conversations I would never have in their presence, jokes I would never tell in their presence. There was just a defined line that existed that I don't know exists now. And I think maybe some of that is what you're saying, code of conduct, but I also think that some of that is cultural. I think that the newer generation, I feel like I'm getting old, but I think that when I say stuff like that, I'm like, oh, this is getting sad. But I think the newer generation, their lines are just blurred, period. And I don't know that they have the same reverence even for their parents, let's say. Like, so it's so when you now take that person and put them in the context of the church, it's like, well, you my bro, you my sis, right? Especially, and I'm gonna toss this to you, especially if you're in the same age group. I think that makes it more difficult, right? Like my bishop was like 40 years older than I am. That was easy,
Yeah.
right? You know, but when the person that is your pastor is 5 years older than you, or the same age, right? Or in some cases younger than you are, I think that becomes difficult.
This shrimp smells really good.
Oh, I hate that.
No, it really is. It's a challenge, especially if people have watched you progress, right? And so at one point, like we were
Contemporaries,
you know,
like we were peers.
yeah, like
or so.
in the pew, you know, and now it's, you know, you've watched me go through consecration and you watch me go through consecration again, and people are telling you, hey, would you like to meet with Pastor Adriane to, you know, talk through some things? Would you feel comfortable with that? Or me like praying for them, even laying hands on them. It gets weird. It gets weird. I think people are, similar to what you were saying, people are trying to figure out, like, how can we still be the same?
Yeah.
Even though it's different.
Even though it's different, but I still want your counsel.
Yeah.
And that's specifically for people who are the same age. Those who are older, I think that not all, but they may want to, they're a little bit more resistant to receiving the counsel because they may find some sense of security in their experience. And I think there's this nuanced navigation that because I also really acknowledge and honor their experience, and I don't want to disqualify that. But I also believe, you know, that God has still positioned us in each other's lives in a way for a reason. And I want to get your crumbs just like you're getting mine, and I want you to get my crumbs. You know what I mean? So it's a different crumb. Where are you going?
Because
I don't like
well,
it.
no, because I think I want to almost go back to the Jesus example that I had before. I think we can almost worship our experiences and miss that. I don't have to actually have. I don't have to have the actual experience to get wisdom and insight from the Lord on whatever the situation is. I think about the fact that Jesus was unmarried.
Yep.
But
No
you
kids.
can't tell me that he can't speak about marriage. He didn't have children, but you can't tell me that he can't speak to raising children, right? And so again, I think some of this stuff is our own internal struggles that we use as cop-outs for not receiving what it is that the Lord has given to us. And there's a level of openness that I think anybody has to have in order to receive help. I think about, like, in African American community, like going to doctors is like, what? Like, where we going to doctor for? But there's a certain level of openness that you just have to have. Like, it is a necessary step in order to get help. And I think I would just kind of say to anybody who's kind of watching this, I think there's a part of you that has to humble yourself in order to receive the benefits of the people that God kind of places before you, whether they're pastors, counselors, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Like, there's just, you will never get help if there's not an openness for the help.
And
Definitely.
I think
Yeah.
that's what has given me the opportunity to have these relationships and have this connection and have this access and have the opportunity to pour into people, is that even though I have the positions that I have, I always remain a student. And so that's why I'm not even, like, I don't want you to worship your experience, and I'm definitely not doing it, but I still want, I love just, and I kind of learned this from you, of just, I'll just let you talk. And I'm going to pay
Don't
attention
tell everybody
to.
my secrets.
I'll leave it at that. But I'm going to let you talk. And it's something that, you know, I definitely will do all the head nods and things like that. But it always ends up showing your heart. And that, to me, is really, that's necessarily for the context and the development of the church, as well as any sort of mental health service. That's why therapy is so effective, because out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. And we let you keep talking enough,
Definitely.
we will really see what's like at the core of it. And so even like, no matter the dynamic of, you know, gender or age, I pay attention to what's being said and what's not being said, and how it's being said, because then I'm able to kind of move forward in my position in whatever access you're actually giving me. Because at the same time, if you're not giving me that access, then you just missed out on a crumb. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
I think that's the challenge, though, especially with pastoral counseling, is that you have this relationship with these people and you never want them to miss out on a crumb. It's the same thing, I'm sure, with when you're doing it in a professional setting, but I think there's also a difference sometimes when people take the time to financially invest in something, versus when you come into this church and we're walking together and we're standing in the same row and lifting our hands and jumping and bopping and all of that. So that's my 2 cents of, you know, challenge in navigating this.
Yeah.
So I believe that as I've availed myself to counsel people in my church, I think I have discovered what a challenge it is to help people through their stuff, but also create boundaries so that the lines are not blurred. I think one of the ways that I have tried to navigate through this successfully is by not being everything to people. And so I think even within counseling, what I've discovered is I am good for a referral, because there are things that are quick and easy, and you need, you know, an answer to a question. I can do that. You need to process through one specific situation. I can do that. I can help you. But I think that there are some deeper dives, some things that take time, some things that are going to take time to process through, to get to the heart of the matter, to get to the root cause of some things. Generally speaking, those are not things that I take on, because I know that it can become very personal and people can become attached. And so I try to remove myself from those situations. I think it's important for you to know what the limits are, what the boundaries are, and to make sure that you keep people within the boundaries. And I think that's tough when you care about people, but I think that sometimes when you care enough, you will walk away. I don't think that caring is just by giving everything. I think sometimes caring is to say that I'm not the person to give, and let's maintain our relationship. And so I try to balance the two things.
Are there any final words? Our food has come. Hallelujah. Any final words on this subject? Where do we go from here? What is the message that we want to leave people with once they finish with this episode?
It's the eyes. I would say, and we say this a lot in our church, I think what I'm hearing from this, and I had mentioned before, like, yes, education is important, but so is application. and not getting discouraged if your application doesn't yield the results that you wanted it to yield initially. I think it's really important for people to continue having these conversations, continue talking about the hard thing, but also for the church to continue to create spaces where people understand that this is actually a space where I'm supposed to be vulnerable, and there is that level of discomfort that comes with it, and if you're willing to go through that discomfort, that's what yields the results. God will honor that if you're doing it for Him and not just so you can have like another sticker on your chest as something else you figured out about yourself. So I would really want people to do the digging, do in here more than you're doing it like on Google and all those other. Be willing to actually do the digging, but also being willing to let people in your spaces to do that as well, and that's in the church community as well as a one-on-one.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think vulnerability is really huge. I want to encourage everyone, find a therapist, pursue it. Find as the church, find a Christian therapist and go through the process. And it's not easy. It's not even really fun because you're going to experience a lot of painful memories or roadblocks, but the idea is that you get to a place of healing. And so when you take the risk and jump out there in terms of saying, I'm going to do this and find my way and allow God to speak to you through the process as well, you're gonna get to a place of healing, and it's gonna be beautiful. It's gonna be better than what you probably imagined, because a lot of times, when you've got to go through this whole big storm, like I don't want to do all of that, or my little ship might, sink. My ship might sink in all of the stormy waters. But it's like God is gonna get you through it. You're gonna get through it, and once you get through it, it's gonna be great.
I love that. Thank you. My hope is that this conversation sparks other conversations. I think this is just, we scratched the surface of this, and I pray that like other people will start to have these conversations and are provoked to action, because I think even with some of these things, we can have a lot of conversations about things that it doesn't really terminate on anything except for a talk. But I'm praying that the talk would turn into some level of action, and that people really would seek healing and wholeness in Jesus. And we recognize that Jesus uses counselors. So thank you all. I appreciate you so much. And I'm ready to eat. So
All right.
let's eat.
Thank you for watching this episode of Talk to Me, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit that notification bell so that you don't miss a single thing. We'll see you next time.